Welcome to Prepping for the Sharks, where you tune into practical and tactical tips for building your business, featuring our live hot seat pitch coaching show. But today we're talking with a special expert guest. I'm Burke Franklin. I developed the first business planning software system called BizPlan Builder, making it easier to make sense to investors. And also with me are our co-hosts, Robert Browning, who is a proven senior executive, entrepreneur, and community leader with more than 40 years of successful business development experience, and Fred Parrish, who's the creator of the Prepping for the Sharks. He's a seasoned executive, COO, CFO, CEO, and he's the co-author with Michael Gerber of the E-Myth CFO, and is now a management consultant who focuses on improving business performance at every level of the organization. And a warm welcome to our special guest, Patricke Below. He's an internationally recognized authority and consultant on strategic and operational planning, execution, and results management. For over 40 years, Patricke has worked across almost every industry, both profit and nonprofits. He's been engaged by over 150 CEOs to develop and implement meaningful plans that have substantially improved and sustained performance. His clients have included such luminaries as Paul J. Meyer, who's one of the founders of personal and professional development industry. And he's also worked directly with Cesar Chavez, the Latino American labor and civil rights hero. Patricke's work has influenced leaders around the world. His classic book, The Executive Guide to Strategic Planning, first published in 1987, and it's pioneered the integrated planning process. And it's been in print for more than 25 years, a record for any management book. And Patricke is currently the CEO and co-founder of CEO Consulting Services, headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. They focus on helping CEOs to successfully master strategic planning, building executive teams, and achieving superior and sustainable results. So let's get into our topic today. The process of planning is as important as the plan itself. Robert, you got a question?
That's a great question. A great topic, and I really appreciate that. And I look forward to getting into it today. Patricke, tell us where you originally developed your passion for planning. How did that happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Where I started really getting involved in planning is in my first assignment after I got out of college was with the General Electric Company. And fortunately, GE was one of the first companies to develop strategic planning. And I was lucky enough to have an assignment in their strategic planning as an internal consultant in their strategic planning division. And that's where I really got turned on to planning, by sitting and watching the power of strategic planning and what it can do for a company's results. So it was that GE experience that really got me started and really gave me the lifelong passion to do planning. I've been doing it for over 40 years, and I've never veered from my interest in planning. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my story with you today.
Great.
Yes, and GE was just the gold standard for strategic planning. Yes. So tell us how that evolved into 40 plus years of consulting.
Well, early on, having worked with GE, I got a call one day from a CEO down in Trinidad, believe it or not, in the Caribbean, named Sidney Knox. And he knew that I had worked for GE, so he thought, well, if I want to do strategic planning, this might be the guy I'd want to talk to. So I obviously took the call and ended up on an assignment with Sidney Knox. He was the CEO of a company called Neal and Massey in the Caribbean, and they were the largest conglomerate in the Caribbean. So I went down to Trinidad for the first time and worked with 12 different of his companies and developed strategic plans for each one of his companies over a 2-year period. So that really introduced me to the whole field of consulting and Sidney Knox, and the rest is history. I've been doing it ever since then. That was a long time ago, but that was the beginning of my consulting career.
Nice.
What exactly is the strategic planning process? Because I think of planning, I'm a bright, shiny objects guy. Like, go find the next bright, shiny object, screw planning, let's just get going, which is obviously a bad idea. I've come around from that myself, but you've got a much better process in mind. Can you explain that to us?
Well, that's a great question. If you could pull up the diagram, I can explain strategic planning via this diagram. The very first chapter in our book on the Executive Guide to Strategic Planning is what is strategic planning? In this diagram, we call it the integrated planning/execution process. Every company that gets involved in planning should have a framework of planning. And this is a framework that I've used for over 40 years. And it has three basic types of planning. The first type is obviously strategic planning. And you can see the elements involved in there: the mission, vision, values, strategic analysis, the driving force, strategic objectives, and strategic projects, and so on. So that's the beginning of the planning process, is strategic planning. But it doesn't end there. Once you develop a longer term strategic plan, which is kind of the master plan for the organization, then you got to get into what I call operational planning. That's a shorter term, 1-year plan. And you can see it's the middle part of this diagram. And then the last type of planning process, and there are 3 types of planning processes in an organization, and there should be. Strategic planning is the front end, operational planning is in the middle, and then the last is what I call plan execution. And a lot of organizations do not have this third type of planning. I call it replanning. All plans change. So in order to make planning come alive and get the kind of results that you're looking for, you need some type of what I call a plan execution process. And it starts with the organization's objectives, then it gets into management reports, then you do an analysis of any performance shortfalls, and then you have a plan execution meeting every month, and then you do corrective action. So this is what I call a very comprehensive process of planning, and it's the one that I've been using for the last 40 plus years in consulting, and it's gotten some amazing results that I'll get into a little bit later on. But this is a key diagram. Anybody that's really serious about planning ought to look at their process and see that it has these 3 types of planning involved. So that's the planning process that I've been using.
And if you could explain why the process of planning is just as important, if not more important, than the plan itself, could you dig into that a bit?
Yeah, as that diagram entitled it was the integrated planning execution process. You need a process that involves people, okay? Planning is a people process, period. We have one line in our book that says, plans don't produce results, people do. So you need a process that's comprehensive, as evidenced by that diagram. But then you also need to figure out who should be on the planning team. That's one of the early decisions that any CEO needs to make. And it's not just the leadership team, it's his direct reports. It could be 1 or 2 other people in the organization, or possibly 1 or 2 persons from the outside that might have a good perspective on that organization. Anyhow, you got to figure out how to best involve these people. And strategic planning requires training and education. You don't do it every day. So a lot of people are involved in operations, and they're not that involved in strategic planning. So when you take them through this process, you're not only trying to build a plan, but you're trying to educate them. For example, what is a mission statement? Why is a mission statement important? What is vision? And you've got to define these terms. There's a lot of terminology issues in management in general, and planning in particular. So anyhow, taking people through the process not only excites them about planning, but it makes sure that they're involved in the planning process, and finally that they're committed. So at the end of the day, it's their plan. It's not my plan as a consultant. They've developed the plan. It's like they've written a book. They're the authors of the plan. And that's why this process, in my view, is as important as the end result, as the plan. Because you want to get people excited about planning, and you want them to buy into the planning process, that it's just not something they do once a year. It's not an event, it's a process. So I've come up with this one-liner that the process of planning is as important as the plan, and sometimes it may be even more important. But that's the key to making planning come alive, is to have a good process that involves the people over a period of time. That's key. You don't do a planning process in a weekend or in a 2-day retreat. You need to a plan to develop this process. And that's why I feel it's very important.
Yeah, you definitely have to get the entire organization involved in that process. But I think you say that the most important responsibility of a leader in a business is developing that strategic plan. So can you go into a little detail about that?
Yeah, let me just kind of here's the book that I developed back in 1987 called The Executive Guide to Strategic Planning. And in that book, in the very first chapter, I've got a sentence. In fact, it's the third sentence in the entire book, and I'm going to just quote it for you if I can. It says, strategic planning is the single most important function of the CEO in any organization. In order for any organization to survive and grow in the future, the CEO and the planning team need to give primary attention to determining what the organization should become. As you know, the CEO is the one person that has an entire view of what that organization is all about, both short-term and long-term. If the CEO does not develop that strategic plan, it will not get developed. So good planning, in my view, starts with strategic planning, okay? And you've got this master plan, and the CEO should be the driver of that. And oftentimes my role in the organization is a facilitator. Sometimes the CEO likes to play the role of a facilitator. The problem is that when the CEO speaks, everybody listens and nods their head. When you have an outside facilitator, the CEO can play more of an active role, and you can get more involvement and participation of the team. So it comes back to the CEO who's committed to doing strategic planning. I've also got one other concept. People have to earn the right to do strategic planning, in my view. And part of that is to have an organization that's profitable and not just surviving. Strategic planning takes time. So if you've got some short-term issues and you're suffering from either profitability or some other issues, you better do maybe operational planning first, or possibly even replanning. But organizations that want to grow do strategic planning. That's the whole purpose of strategic planning, is how do we want to grow the organization?
Well, I want to ask a follow-on question to that, Patrick. Thanks. That's exactly my experience. Also, how important is it that the business owner, CEO, convey that message and have that message understood, internalized, and executed by the different layers of the organization? Because the CEO cannot make everything happen on their own. They've got to get people involved in that, right?
Exactly. Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, the CEO has to lead, but he has to do more than just lead the strategic planning process. He's got to communicate why he's doing this strategic plan to the entire organization. As you know, the CEO has more influence than anyone else in the organization. So when he or she talks, people listen. So once a strategic plan is developed, the CEO has to communicate this plan to the entire organization, not only once, but probably every month in any kind of meetings he has. He's got to keep communicating why he's doing the strategic plan, what the strategic planning means to the organization, and then he's got to actually manage by it. And that's where the rubber hits the road. There's a lot of strategic plans, quite frankly, that end up sitting on shelves. They do the strategic plan, and everybody gets all excited, and then it goes on the shelf because that CEO has really not internalized the importance of it. So the clients that I work with, that I like to work with, are those CEOs that are not only committed to developing a strategic plan, but more importantly, they're committed to managing by that strategic plan. And that's no small task, but that's what planning is all about, in my view.
Great, thank you.
What's the most effective approach to it? Because I think of myself, starting out as an entrepreneur, and I can imagine many of our audience are thinking, like you say, that plan ends up on the shelf. So how do you approach this where the plan stays alive and people, stay with the plan or stick to the plan? Obviously, you need to make changes along the way, but how do you approach it? How do you get your people engaged in this to really stay with it? Because everybody needs to. You can't just be the CEO drive. Yeah, the CEO has to drive it, but everybody else has to follow along. So how do you approach that?
Well, that's again where I come back to the process. Okay. Uh, in terms of following up and making sure that strategic plan gets implemented, it starts initially with plan communication. Okay, that is so important. Developing a plan is one thing, but communicating it throughout the organization is a whole new process. And that has to be done starting at the top, but it has to go throughout the entire organization. So the approach that I use, and quite frankly, there's a lot of CEOs that think you can do strategic planning in a weekend retreat, quite frankly. And to me, that's an insult to strategic planning. As important as that is, you cannot develop a strategic planning in a 2-day retreat. You're not doing justice to it. So our process generally runs from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And we have each month we have a 1-day planning session, okay, over that 3 to 6 month period. So at the end of 6 months, you've got a solid plan. And in between the meetings, we have assignments where people can do work offsite. And then they come back and then we process each of those elements on the diagram that we showed earlier. And this is roughly a 3 to 6 month process. So it takes time to do strategic planning. And planning is hard work, quite frankly. It takes real thought and real effort and real analysis. But at the end of the day, you not only want to plan, but you want to make sure people are committed to the plan, that they understand the plan, and that the plan there will be changes made. And that's why this corrective action and plan execution is so critical to the planning process. A little bit later, I'll talk about plan execution, but in my view, after being in this field for over 40 years, I have not found a credible book on plan execution yet. So I'm going to talk about the possibility of we're developing one right now. But that's our approach. It takes over time, 6 months minimum to develop a solid strategic plan.
So why don't you tell us about the execution, but then also as part of that, if you can give us some ideas about how to keep that executive team committed to the plan. Because again, the CEO can't execute on their own. They have to have the team motivated, focused, and moving forward in that execution constantly.
Exactly. And again, I'll keep coming back to that. It's all about the process. Okay. The way that I keep plans alive is once we develop the strategic plan, and there's a lot of excitement obviously around developing a plan. The question is now what? Okay. So what we do every month is we hold what I call a plan execution meeting. Okay. We're either looking at the strategic plan once a quarter or the operational plan every single month. And that's where management reports come into play. That's where you keep the visibility of the plan in front of everybody. And that's where you make the corrective actions. So when you have these monthly follow-up meetings, that keeps the plan alive and that keeps the plan active and that keeps the plan visible. And then you do what I call replanning. Okay. And the replanning is these corrective actions that come into play. And then like I say, on a quarterly basis, not monthly, but quarterly basis, you look at the strategic plan and you say, okay, what's working, what's not working, what needs adjustment. So by having these follow-up meetings on a monthly and quarterly basis, this plan is in front of everybody, so they can't kind of duck it. And the CEO obviously is at the head of the table, and you're looking at, are we achieving the results? If so, great. If not, what do we have to change? So planning is a very dynamic process. It's not a one-time event. It's not, let's put together a plan and, it sits on the shelf. So the clients that I work with make planning a way of life, really. Burke talked about planning as a living process. That's exactly what it is. It's a living process in the organization. And one other thing I want to add here, there are four major functions that a top management team needs to take care of. And it starts with planning, then it's organizing, then it's motivating, and then it's controlling. But planning is at the very top, okay, of any CEO's list, in my view. So that's how planning comes alive, and I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about some of the results I've achieved.
Yeah, I have a related question, but I want to throw it at Burke first because, he's widely considered the father of contemporary planning software. And we've had this conversation that people think you can just do it with AI, not involve people, not involve his amazing platform, et cetera, et cetera. So, Burke, could you comment on that and maybe do an interaction with Patricke on that subject? It's so contemporary.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to make it easier because I found that, what the thing about planning at some level is that if it's just you and you're driving from LA to San Francisco, you jump in your car and you go, you stop for gas wherever, you get lunch wherever, pretty straightforward. But if you're coordinating a family event and everybody's going to get together somewhere, you're coordinating a number of activities that all interact with each other. There's money going to be spent. Can you be efficient with the money? Can you be efficient with the time and the effort? And so that's what I think of. And at the same time, what my biz plan builder was really for is to explain to investors, here's what this business does. And it starts out where Patricke starts at the top, the mission and the vision and the values. So because you've got all these people working for you and they don't necessarily know what to do. They need to make decisions. And if you want to run every single decision through the business owner, the CEO, it's going to take forever because the CEO can't respond to all that. And so if you have a plan that people can operate on their own, they know, okay, this is where we're going. In fact, I was thinking about the British Olympic rowing team. They had a mantra that said, does it make the boat go faster? So the question is, you can have a crazy idea, let's drink coffee before we go. Does it make the boat go faster? Yes or no? Let's row naked. Does that make the boat go faster? Yes or no? Probably a bad idea. But, no idea was a bad idea. The whole thing boiled down to, does it make the boat go faster? And I would say in this case, does your idea make the business better? And so, but if you've got an overall structure of this is what we're about and where we're going and who we help and the problem we solve, then the people can say, well, does it fit in that? What I do, does what I want to do fit with that? And we just give people ideas of how to say it, what to say, how to say it in a structure, in a software app that you can follow along with. Because I think there's a lot of resistance to doing the planning because we're sitting around, we need to get out and do something. And like Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, said, don't just do something, stand there. Because people are in such a hurry to get out and get going that they don't really think through, what would be the best way to go about this? Let's zoom out and look at the map first and get a sense of what we're going to do and where we're going to go and what we're going to do first and second. And we got problems to solve. What's the biggest problem we should solve first? And there's a number of questions to ask, and you really need to take some time and get all the puzzle pieces on the table. And then you're designing, this is the process of showing this is what the puzzle looks like when it's done, kids, but then you've got all these pieces. And so now you can get to putting the pieces together. Maybe I'm mixing metaphors like crazy, but hey, that's just, I'm trying to make it feel like a good feel-good experience. It's worth doing. It's worth prioritizing a strategic plan or a business plan because it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're coordinating a lot of people, a lot of activities, spending a lot of money, and you can't afford to waste any of that.
I like what
I think
said.
the other aspect
of
that too, sorry, Robert, is, okay, we have a plan and we are executing the plan. We have all of our puzzle pieces and we're trying to put them together. Nothing ever goes according to plan. So how do you manage that, Patricke? I think that meeting cycle that you mentioned earlier is a very important aspect of that. But then what is the process to say, all right, this was the plan. This is what the results are today. So how are we going to fix the problem, get back on track, change the course because something in our world has changed and we need to take a different tack. So how do you look at those kinds of things?
Well, one of the big issues that I find with what I call plan execution meetings is information. There, with the internet, is, there's information overload in organizations. Okay, there's so much information available. The question is, what is the most pertinent information to the plan? So you have to step back and take some time and develop a management reporting system that is reflective of the results and the plan itself. And that's a whole new process right there, is developing, do we have the right information we're looking at the right time and at the right level? So that's one of the early issues of having a plan execution meeting, is to have the right information available. Then you have to carve out time, and I'm saying at least a half a day, if sometimes it's an entire day each month, to look at how are we doing against the plan, what results are we achieving, and more importantly, where are we headed? The purpose of a plan execution meeting isn't just to look in the rearview mirror and look at what we've done in the past. It's what are we going to do in the future? What does the next month look like? What does the next quarter look like? So you may have to do some reforecasting, okay? So you're actually having these, what I call them, planning meetings every month now, okay, to make these adjustments in the plan. And I like your metaphor of a puzzle. This is like putting a puzzle together, putting all these pieces together. But the question is, at least once a month, you're having what I call a formal plan execution meeting, where everybody can see not only what past performance is, but the important thing is, what are we going to do in the future? Planning is obviously forward-looking, okay? So that these meetings are extremely important. Now, a lot of organizations look at financial results every month, which they need to do, but it's more than just numbers we're looking at. We're looking at action plans. We're looking at key performance indicators, okay? We're saying, okay, here's our results year to date, but now what are we going to do looking ahead? So that keeps the planning alive. And it comes back to the CEO willing to take the time, and the leadership team to take the time to do this. But I don't know if that helps, but these plan execution meetings are absolutely critical if you want to have a good planning process, in my view.
100%.
And Fred does predictive management, and part of his expertise, being America's small business CFO, is he developed technology that helps people look into the future rather than driving in the rear view mirror, so that you can see what's coming at you rather than waiting for it to get there. I was just wondering, Fred, if you could comment on predictive management relative to what Patricke is sharing.
Yeah, it's very much along the same lines as what Patricke is addressing here. The way I express it, Patricke, is you plan, you evaluate, and then you adjust the plan, and you just continue that cycle on a really an indefinite schedule until you really honestly until you sell the business, because it is an ongoing, never-ending process. But
Right.
really in our approach is we really are looking at quantifying the plan that you are developing. So we produce the numbers, and we can track those numbers. We can look at the KPIs, and we can see if we are actually on track. So it's perfectly aligned with what you're talking about.
And Patricke, on a results basis, which I know is a key aspect of your vision, and you share with me about, on the execution results side, is how did you get chosen, your first initial book, to be the top 10 most influential books by the organizations in China that determine are the top 10 most influential books in management in all of China, and yours is on that list. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. There are a lot of books on planning, obviously, okay? The problem is that there are very few books on the process of planning, okay? And when we wrote our book, I wanted to write almost a user's manual. Here's the process of planning. Here's step 1, step 2, and step 3. And it took us over 2 years to write that book, but I'm very proud to say that the book has lasted for well over 30 years. It's still available today on Amazon. It's still relevant. It's what I call almost a classic book. But let me talk a little bit about the client results that I've gotten, okay? Because planning is great, but getting improved results is even greater. So there's a couple of classic examples that I like to use. I worked with a manufacturer in the paper industry a number of years back. What I didn't know is when I met with the CEO, he was planning to sell his organization, but he did not tell me that. He just said, we need some help with the planning process. So I worked with him over a 3-year period. We took their historic profitability had been in the 3 to 4% range, okay? And he had an offer on the table for $42 million to sell his company. Well, after a 3-year period, we got that profitability up to 12%. He ended up selling his company for $52 million, okay, just as a result of that 3-year period. And one of the statements he made to me when we were signing that last planning contract for well over $100,000, he said, Patrick, this is the best investment I've ever made. And I agree. If anytime you can make $10 million in an investment like that, it's well worth the effort. There's
Absolutely.
another example that I use. I was working with a third party, small, very small firm. There were only 15 people. They were a third party selling ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. I started working with them with 15 employees. One of the nice things I've had in my career is I worked with CEOs for a long period of time, not just 1 or 2 years. I worked with the CEO for 10 years. After a 10-year period, he ended up employing over 100 people, and he sold his company for $12 million to Principal Financial out of Iowa. Okay, and he says it was the planning process that made this growth possible. And then one other client that I worked with just recently, they were doing I met them in 2011. There was a new CEO. He said, we need some help. We're losing money. Well, 10 years later, their revenue went from 13 million to 95 million in a 12-year period. So they started in 2011, they were doing 13 million. In 2024, they ended up doing $93 million.
Wow.
And again, it credits the planning process and the culture of planning.
Great
Planning
examples.
requires a culture. So that's just a few examples of what kind of results you can get if you take planning seriously and you really believe that the process is as important as the plan.
I like that Cesar Chavez, when he passed away, it's now a national historic monument where their offices were, and he's widely celebrated. But Patrick's book, which Patricke helped Cesar Chavez, was one of the only things on his desk when he passed away. And in Fortitude, they have kept that the same way it was when he passed, and Patrick's book is still there.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, they have a picture of his desk, and on his desk is the Executive Guide to Operational Planning.
So it is historical, and there's so much we can talk about it. And I feel like a lightweight compared to Burke and Fred here, because they've been living this their whole careers, and their counterpoint to you to make it all possible, both not only on the process but the technology and the predictive management and everything in between. So what a great conversation. Now, Patricke, if you're going to leave our audience with some thoughts today that maybe could be actionable, a few tips and things that they should carry away from this particular podcast, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, again, let me thank you for being on. I really appreciate, the time and the opportunity to kind of present my story. But to me, the most important takeaways, hopefully from this session, are a couple. One is I'll go back to that diagram that I showed earlier on the integrated planning process. That is our process. Planning is a technology, okay? It's not just setting objectives and, getting back to work. There is a technology of planning, and you need this, what I call a planning framework, okay? And there's a lot of frameworks of planning, but you got to make sure that your framework not only has strategic planning in it and not only has operational planning in it, but it has plan execution as part of it. So that's one of the main takeaways, is to have a comprehensive planning framework that you're operating by. And then secondly is you need a CEO that really believes in this process and will take the time, and he holds his people accountable for executing on that plan. And it starts with the process. People not only have to be excited about planning, but they have to believe that this plan is the way they're going to manage their organization. They're going to manage their function. Okay. It's not something, again, you stick on the shelf. So that's critical. And then finally, the third thing, for any interest in following up on planning, I would encourage them to purchase our book. The book's available on Amazon, The Executive Guide to Strategic Planning. It's a short book, 120 pages. Somebody told me many years ago that you either write a large book and cover the waterfront and no one will read it, or you write a short book and you hit the high points, as we do, in 120 pages, and CEOs will take the time to read it. It only takes a couple, 3 hours. And
Burke is reading it. Aren't
What's
you reading
that?
the book now, Burke?
Burke, you're not on, you're mute. You're mute.
Yeah, Burke is reading your book and he's into it. He's, it's like eating cheesecake. It's so rich with good answers. Now, you have a new book coming out, and you have most of it done, and you're going to have it out in the new year. What did you say the title was going to be again for your new book?
Well, again, we've got a 3-book series. The Executive Guide to Strategic Planning was the first book.
Right.
And we followed that up with the Executive Guide to Operational Planning, which was our second book.
Okay.
And now this third book is going to be called The Executive Guide to Plan Execution. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little embarrassed to even say this, but the fact that there are no credible books on plan execution, to me, I'll point the fingers back at me, because, I've been a planning consultant all these years, and I even haven't written a book. But our next book is going to come out next year. And it's going to be about plan execution, because this is where the rubber hits the road, and CEOs need to understand what it takes to implement a plan.
And,
So
and what's the best way for people to, for now, reach you? Because I know you're updating your website and you're on LinkedIn, but how is it easy to find you on LinkedIn? They need your middle initial too, right?
Well, just look, Patrick J. Below. My initial is J for Joseph. The other more direct way is just to let me give you my cell phone, because you can just call me direct. It's 608-239-3622. Just call my cell phone. If I'm not there, leave a voicemail, and I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more about planning, not only for CEOs, but also for consultants. There's a lot of consultants that say they do strategic planning. Okay. So I would like to get consultants involved in this process of strategic planning, and hopefully that they'll read the book as well.
Yeah, I'm in the process of reading your book, and it really is, like you said, it's 120 pages, but it's like succinct, which is refreshing. And I want to say also, it kind of takes the assumption that strategic planning is hard and takes a long time and all that stuff that I think a lot of people probably presume going in, which is why they maybe avoid doing it, why I would avoid doing it. But at the same time, when realizing the benefit of it and seeing really it's simple, but it's a number of steps. And so it's a number. And the one thing we didn't mention here was priorities, which you talk about in your book about, we got problems. What's the priority of sorting this stuff out, and then build a plan around that as well. So because a lot of people, they kind of neglect they're focused on their problems, but how do you strategically solve them in a way that makes the most efficient sense to a way of going about it, which I think your book really addresses well. So for someone, I want to offer your book with Biz Plan Builder because, Biz Plan Builder, while ostensibly originally was to help entrepreneurs pitch investors, to explain to investors like why this product at all, why now, and why from me, which is critical, and to really make that make sense. And these investors, they look at 1,000 deals a year and they maybe fund 5 of them, which what happens to the other 995 because they don't have their act together. And I think that's really what your process does, is has a business have their act together. And that way the CEO doesn't have to answer every single question. The people know what to do, they know why they're doing it, and they know what their priorities are. And that makes a world of difference.
And one last question that I want to throw out, and Patrick, I'll let you finish it up, but how important is it to have the right kind of truly financial guy, CFO level, to validate your assumptions in your planning process? I just wondered, Fred, could you comment on that, and possibly you too, Patrick? Or
yeah, go ahead, Patrick. I mean, you probably don't want my answer to that, but
okay.
No, go ahead, Patrick.
As a CFO yourself, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a little biased, so
Absolutely. Well, strategic plan doesn't start with numbers, it ends with numbers. Okay. You've
right.
got to have credibility between these projections that, most organizations make. And do you have a plan that's actually going to implement and follow through and achieve those projections? So there's a close tie-in between the numbers, particularly the financial numbers in an organization, but also what I call non-financial numbers. Okay. You can't quantify everything. You got to use also what I call qualitative analysis as well as quantitative
100%.
analysis. Okay. So the credibility of a plan, though, ends up, are we achieving our financial results? At the end of the day, are we improving revenue? Are we improving profitability? Are we improving market share? All those things are quantitative and measurable. And it's the planning process that will get you there. Okay. As I said earlier, plans don't produce results, people do, but you got to have the right numbers.
That's right. And you've got to have the right plan to follow. So
yeah.
One example I discovered in a strategic planning process where we brought in the shipping guy. You'd think it's just the management team, all the smart, educated people. Well, we don't bring the shipping guy, but the company was small enough. Bring in the shipping guy. And he was in there at the table. He says, we ship FedEx overnight, which is very expensive. We ship FedEx second day air, which is okay. And then we ship ground. He says, it would just be simpler if we just shipped everybody second day air. Because more often than not, the way FedEx works is all the boxes go to Memphis. They all go in the thing, they spin around in there and they get sent out. Do you think FedEx is going to sort out and say, let's send the second day ones and put them over here and think about them later? No. If they can throw it on the plane tonight, right now, they will. And so we found that people were getting the second day air the next day anyway. Why don't we just ship everything second day air? And so from logistics, and this really isn't like there's a financial component here for sure. But actually, when you balance out the cost of shipping all those 3 different ways and the mechanism we had to deal with, in the thought process and wrangling next day, second day ground, just one way of doing it, it simplified the process. It cost less. Everybody got their product the next day, more or less, and that came from the shipping guy. And that was one of those problem solved, financial thing better. And I was going to say also the CFO, I find the difference between a CFO and an accountant is the CFO is more of a financial architect. So you're sitting there with the wheels are spinning during the strategic planning process. What's this going to cost? What's this going to make us? Is this going to be more efficient? How's this going to work? How do we make this financially make sense? And that might be my answer Fred's question or answer for Fred, That's what's going on over there. But that's critical, because you want to know, hey, Fred, what's this going to take, And so anyway.
That's a great example of involving people in getting their best thinking. And the CEO does not have all the answers. And that's a perfect example of involving people that, have got better answers. Okay.
Frontline.
Well, and the guy who came up with the problem is the one, said, great one, Bob, solve it. You solve it. Go for it. And they get all excited because they bring up the problem, they get empowered to go solve it. And,
Exactly.
because people want to know, if I came out and say, hey, we need to change how we do shipping, everybody around the table is going to go, why? It's working the way it is. Why are we changing this? Well, anyway, he came up with the problem. We got this problem, and go solve it. You're on. And he was stoked to go deal with it. Problem solved.
Frontline input is another key element, isn't it, Patrick?
Absolutely. I mean, again, it goes back. That's a great example of why the process is as important as the plan. Okay.
It
The
is.
best process will produce the best plan.
It's
every
a great
time.
note to end on today. Patrick Bilo, wow. I've been a big fan of his for a long time. We've known each other, it seems like almost 30 years now. And a lot of people don't know who Paul J. Meyer is, one of the pioneers in putting together the whole personal development industry. And when Patrick shared his process with them, they totally changed the whole structure of the company, which is still one of the largest consulting firms in the world because of Patrick's influence, among many other success stories. And it's kind of a cool side note. Marquette University, famous for basketball, and it's way back when, but Patrick used to play basketball for Marquette. I think that's so cool.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
That was a long time ago, but
Little
Yeah.
side notes, there's a bunch more because there's the personal side of the story, but hey, what a great conversation. Thank you so much, Patrick, Fred, and Burke. And we're prepping for thesharks.com. Come on there to sign up for free. There's so many great content that we're going to offer like this, as well as if you're an entrepreneur or a small business and you want to apply to be part of our 5-minute 5-point pitch challenge, go on there and see what's possible. And our team and our esteemed celebrity guests will give you input that's invaluable. So thanks, everybody. And Patrick, would you repeat how to get a hold of you one last time to make it easy?
yeah, the simplest way is just to pick up the phone. I'm at 608-239-3622. If I'm not available, that's my cell phone. I'll give you a call back if you leave me a voicemail. I'll be happy to talk with you.
Doesn't
Thank
get
you
much
guys a
easier
lot.
than that.
That's
Okay.
great, Patrick. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure.